Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's great to have you here. We're going to be talking today about the importance of digital readiness and the cost of delay. Now, before we get started, I know that we're back at level 2, and there's a possibility of being at level 1 soon. I thought I'd run a little poll just to get us going. So let's have a look. Let's see if I can get it running. So if you wouldn't mind answering this one, where are you working today? So if you take a couple of minutes just to... Sorry about that. Okay, we'll give that a couple more seconds. Just while you're answering that poll, I thought no one's answering. I'm in Fiji, Hawaii, a tropical island, and never coming home. So perhaps that's a good thing. Okay, so let's have a look. Share the results with you. So 45% of you are still at home and haven't been back in the office yet. That's pretty much the same for me. But there's a few people that are at home and have had a few days back at the office, and it's at least 10% of you who never left the office. Okay, fine. Hey, well, so let's just make sure that's gone away. Thanks very much for joining us again today. Look, no one knows how long the impact of COVID is going to last. We're fortunate in New Zealand that we're heading to level 1. But what we do know is that certain businesses were more prepared for it than others. And I think I've shared this stat with in other webinars and things where my colleague in Germany who runs the Users Association there talked about 40% of businesses were not ready to go digital and were unable to cope. So today, we've asked our good friends at Jade to pop along and explore how organisations can become digitally ready, embracing innovation to prepare themselves. This event also sets us up for our After Fives and webinars that we plan to run into the rest of the year around the sort of the trends that are occurring around digitalisation and technology. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when I come back. We've got 3 speakers today. Those of you that have been around Two Anns and Flint for a little bit will know Edward. He's done several things for us already, but he's Edward is from Austria to Gibraltar, Wellington to Christchurch. He's a nomadic technologist. While the surroundings may have changed, his appetite for exploring and finding real-world applications for emerging technologies hasn't. Edward is Jade's Director of Technology and is on the AI Forum of New Zealand. He's been active in the public using his whole toolbox to make AI and emerging tech more popular and accessible, including the coffee machine, which I've still yet to try out. John Ashcroft, who you can also see on the screen, oversees Jade's Innovation and Collaboration Program. He's at the sharp end of the product development and client and partner engagements. He's a futurist and has held a variety of technical and management roles at Jade. Does that just mean you've been there a long time? He's a budding aviator, rides fast motorcycles. I gave that up several years ago, and is a history buff. David is the technical leader at Jade with a strong desire to support others to succeed in these complex environments. He's got strong, consistent analytical skills and a broad base of in-depth knowledge. He's referred to his colleagues as the one you want working on your business if things ever go south. Given you're in Christchurch, you can't go much further. But hey, David's got a history of influencing sound decision-making, resulting in long life systems, building long life systems and cost-effective solutions. I'm going to hand over to Edward now and let him take control of the next 45, 50 minutes. Just one thing, people, remember there's a Q&A button. You're more than willing to stick questions in there. I will be facilitating a Q&A session at the end. And please remember that the chat, if you're chatting to everybody, that we like to keep it seamless because we're a professional organisation after all. So, hand it over to Edward.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know about you, but after about 6 weeks or 7 weeks of lockdown, I still struggle to find the mute-unmute button. So bear with me on that one. Today we thought we'd share a little bit what we think about the importance of digital readiness and also share a couple of the stories that we've had. Jade's been around obviously for quite a while. We celebrated our 40th birthday not too long ago. And to answer Craig's question about John, yes, John has been there for 40 years, well, almost. So we also want to share a couple of the lessons that we had from previous sort of quite major shifts, quite literally seismic shifts in some cases here in Christchurch. I want to kick us off by asking or answering really a pretty simple question, maybe. Oh, there's me. What is the difference between New Zealand and Australia? And so typically when I arrived here, this was the lead up to some punchline one way or another, and you were just sort of guessing which country is going to be on the bottom end of the joke. But today, I really want to answer this with a very simple, about $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion is what our government had committed to UFB, ultra-fast broadband. And this is actually a really good example from an outsider like myself who's lived in New Zealand for quite a while, then left, then came back again. 1.5 billion is a sum that we don't just have up our sleeves. It's quite a big commitment for something that doesn't necessarily pay off straight away, where you have to act with conviction and truly believe that this will make a difference. And for all the praise that our current government rightfully gets, it was actually a previous party that signed off on that wisely and really with conviction that this is the right thing to do for New Zealand. And so that ended up with us having an experience roughly like this. These are not the real characters, but this is roughly what my household looked like. I was on a video call with typically up to 12 incoming video streams. My wife was on a video call. My two children were having Google Hangouts with their teachers all at the same time, or were watching some kids show on Netflix in 4K high definition. That was our experience here. It was amazingly how everything held up, and everybody I talked to had pretty much the same story, whether it was in the North Island and the South Island. All the while, our colleagues over in Australia had more of that experience. And I know that because we had to ramp up a whole lot of people's mobile plans because their broadband internet at home just didn't keep up with a single video stream, let alone multiple in a household. And the reason why I mentioned this is really it's driving home the point for us that resilience, security, and to some extent even innovation, these are things that cost a lot of money, and they don't necessarily have a direct impact on your top or bottom line. It's a little bit like insurance, where you know you kind of should do this, but if it costs a lot of money, you don't really want to do it, and then the earthquake comes and your house is in rumble, and then you know why you invested in it in the first place. We now know why we've invested 1.5 billion into technology and into resilience. So to get this started, I thought we'd take a little bit of a detour back, and there's no better person I could think of as our own John Ashcroft to sort of go down a little bit the history lane, being a history buff and all, and share a few lessons over the past decade or so from Jade around resilience and obviously Christchurch around resilience. So John, over to you.
Wonderful, thanks Ed. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the intro, Craig and Ed. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. As Ed kind of hinted, I have been at Jade for a while, and it's been an absolutely awesome ride. But what I wanted to talk about today was digital readiness and what that means for you. And I think it's interesting, at the moment, we see digital readiness very much through the lens of the current issues that we're facing with COVID and having to work at home and stuff. But I wanted to take a step back from that for a moment and just think about digital readiness as actually sort of the outcome of a digital transformation that business has been going through for a number of years and is still going through. And digital transformation is a critical part of moving businesses forward from the economies of last century to the economies of this century. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. And digital readiness, I think, has to start with the customer. And so it's not just about dealing with a disaster, and we'll talk about disasters in a minute, but digital transformation, the process is really about reinventing and reimagining our businesses to gain market share and profit through satisfying our customers. So it starts and ends with the customer, and it's how we can evolve our businesses to meet their changing needs and to be able to serve them in the ways they want to be served and how they, in the manner they want to be served as well. So we need to be flexible to deal with the different ways they want to work. We need to be agile to deal with the changing ways they want to work. So as things evolve, as new technology comes around, we need to be on board with that so that we're getting our share of the business that's going past. And then as we think about more when things go wrong, we need to be resilient. We need to ensure that as a digital business, we're available more or less come what may when people want to be able to do business with us. And the last point I've put up there is effectiveness. We want to be effective, and by that I mean not just efficient, but actually cost effective. So done properly, a digital transformation delivers top line benefits through increased sales and more customer satisfaction, but it also can help to reduce cost to serve. And if I think of one example of that would be if we put a self-service portal in for our customers, then we're reducing our cost to serve because the customers are now effectively doing their own work and work that perhaps our staff used to do. So a self-service portal can be a very good way to scale and also to provide availability and technology that enables our customers to have a better customer experience any time of the day or night. And we can step that up. So if the customers have a need that isn't met through self-service, we'll typically have a chat or a bot interface on the website so they can step up the next level of query or issue through technology again, keeping our cost to serve low. We can go to our voice chatbot or voice automation system. And finally, at the end, maybe go to a live call center, which is obviously the most expensive option. But by stacking up the digital technologies, we can take out a chunk of the workload at each point at a lower cost. So digital readiness provides a whole framework to move a business, any business, forward in a way that lets the customers access it, lets it keep running through the odd bump that might come along, and reduces our cost to serve, all of which are great things. Now, having come from Christchurch, I couldn't not mention the Christchurch earthquake, which was actually quite a signal sort of event in terms of digital transformation and digital readiness. And so for this discussion, I'm not going to worry so much about all the macro stuff that came out of the earthquake. But what I did want to draw out was the fact that the physical devastation, particularly of the CBD, very much exposed the vulnerability of on-premise and a reliance on a physical infrastructure. And I'll never forget the photos at the time of people struggling out of half-collapsed buildings, carrying a server under each arm, covered in plaster and dust, and carting these damn servers out, because that's where all their business records were. And their business couldn't function without that data that was locked up on their servers. And there were even people doing, you know, like guerrilla raids in the middle of the night, trying to get past the army checkpoints to get back into the CBD to get data out of their buildings, because they'd suddenly realised that they needed information that was being physically held on site. And they were actually like, cutting through the wire to get into the CBD away from the checkpoints. And I think that was a real wake-up call in a digital sense of how vulnerable we were, and particularly for smaller businesses, SMEs and sole traders and such like, how vulnerable they were in an on-prem type environment. It exposed their dependence on data, on IP, and on having access to their premises. And that in turn drove readiness. And I think the whole of New Zealand really saw those lessons. So interestingly, in 2014, New Zealand was actually the highest penetration of Microsoft Office 365 in the world. So New Zealand took up that option to move their business systems and even straightforward office systems into the cloud with alacrity. And I think that is a large part, the lessons that came from the Christchurch earthquake. Of course, other trends in the market and general environment also contribute to that drive to get stuff off-prem and into a place where it's more likely to survive something that happens and can be accessed remotely. And key things in there are things like the increasing trend towards mobile and remote access by our customers, and then that kind of leads to mobile and remote access by our staff and by ourselves. And the more places and the more different ways you want to access something, the more likely it is to work better if it's in a cloud type environment. So some interesting things there. I'd like to close with just some thoughts around what we need to think of and what the major components are of a digitally ready business. Remembering that a digitally ready business, to my mind, is a business that's ready to serve all its customers in the ways that those customers want to be served. And that includes, like at the time they want to be served and where from. And to do that effectively, and particularly cost effectively, and with resilience. So the first big thing in that and driving the whole customer-driven view of the world is our customer communications. And that starts right at the point where customers are doing research or becoming aware of a product or service offering that we're making available. And we know now that, depending on who you talk to, well over 85% of customers do some form of online research before they even talk to a salesman or a customer or a supplier. So if you're not in that mix, if you're not aware, customers can't become aware of you or don't find you online, then that's a problem for a start. And it flows through customer communications. I include in that all the interactions that the customers have up to the point where they place an order or purchase a product or service. And so that also includes things like social media, and brand is a very key part of that awareness and driving business and managing the whole feel and experience that the customer gets from when he first touches anything to do with your business through to the point where he has the confidence to place an order. The next big chunk that we need to think about in terms of being a digitally ready business is how we're going to actually manage order fulfillment. And this, of course, is going to vary hugely depending on the nature of the business, the nature of the product or service and the customer. But thinking about the current situation, we can imagine that a lot of, for example, restaurants or takeaway shops have had a huge scramble to implement online ordering to implement contactless payment, to implement some form of delivery or contactless pickup. And that whole transformation has been forced on them in a matter of weeks to go from a physical 20th century business to a digitally ready 21st century business just in that space. But from other companies as well, for example, our friends at the warehouse, have moved from fulfilling most of their business in store to fulfilling all of the business they were currently selling online. And that's put a lot of stress on systems. And it's just that whole being digitally ready means that we can scale up and that we can deal with these situations. The third bullet point I've got there is the internal processes, and this goes to effectiveness again. So we're talking here about cost effectiveness of processes like billing, for example, but it also includes in internal processes, I think, of things like data analytics and being able to look at the data around our business to understand how things are happening, what customers are actually buying, where we're making good margins, what forms of marketing are working, and so forth. And the other key thing in effectiveness in internal process is the opportunity to use automation to reduce cost and provide scalability. And the final bubble I've got up there is people and our staff safety and wellness. And staff and people and human resources are really, although I was talking earlier about automation and so forth, are where our IP is in businesses nowadays. And increasingly, what we actually have in terms of a long-term asset to the business is in our staff's head rather than in physical things. And so it's really important that we look after our staff and that we provide an environment in which they can flourish and do their best work and make the largest contribution to our business. So for me, all of this stuff put together gives you a digitally ready business and makes it easier for us to handle bumps when we get things like COVID come along, although we hope that won't happen too often. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be doing Q&A later, but at this stage I'd like to hand over to Dave Watson.
Thanks, John. Just grab that share button for you. Thanks very much. It's great to actually talk to colleagues around the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit more of an operational view of digital readiness in your business, where we're talking now about the fact that in this more resilient digital world, our customers' applications and our customers are actually remote. We may not have any on-prem equipment at all, and it still needs to be managed. It could still be on-prem, but in somebody else's data center. At the same time, our management and our NOCs and SOCs and our system management centers may be offline from those customer systems and critical systems at the time. So they're going to be remote as well. And then finally, of course, the staff that are supporting the business are going to be remote as well. So that actually puts a bit more demand around how we look at that whole technical management area of being resilient and ready. So I'm going to go back into the history that we've basically done, and the fact that when we started building out our management services and our infrastructure services for supporting the business, we actually had a few core principles, and they've been there for probably decades now. But the critical one was always that we wanted to be able to function remotely, even before we had broadband internet and the ability to do wonderful video conferencing. But as we evolved the systems, we also started automating more and more, so that when our staff could be more knowledgeable and they weren't being burnt on doing day-to-day functions that our automation systems could do in systems management. And the final part of resilient in these principles we were looking for was that we can't guarantee that our management centres or staff will actually be able to connect to these critical systems to manage them, even if customers are still available on them. They can still work the systems. So our management systems have to have an autonomous agent or some form of way of running without access to the central facilities, often for some time. So the focus here is that the application may well be running in an available environment, but our staff and our management may not be able to get to it, even though our customers can. So some of the things that we've done on it, the way we were looking at this thing, was location independence was always a key. So our networking was the first thing. Obviously, networks today have given us tremendous access and capacity and very high resilience compared to the networks in the past. So obviously, using VPN is a simple solution to provide that remote access, trust, and privacy on the wire. Gives us the ability to extend our bubble or our business, not our bubble, but our business out to our users, our staff, and out to our supported systems. But more than that, you've got to be ready to move if you're going to be in the office. So one of the things that we did was to ensure that our staff actually had always workable remote data capabilities. So we subsidized staff to actually have broadband internet available and test it so that at any time we could move people home and know that they had the capacity to carry the business on. The second part we did was almost all of our access technologies are the same, whether they're remote or local. So our network authorization and network access rules that come in and out work from the desktop or at home. So all of that technology that we need for remote is exercised every day. In addition, when you work remote, it will automatically run up the VPN if you're not in the office. And we also ensure that we've got, mandatory minimum security checks on the end workstations from that agent that helps do all this remote access. So that means we have the ability very quickly to move people to other locations, not necessarily home, but we know they can work from home. The other key, of course, is to put your business support apps, not so much critical systems because they may have other constraints, but your business apps into the cloud so that you actually don't worry about that location dependence anymore. And I think most businesses have done that already today. Part of the key to this is the commitment to build those sort of remote and autonomous services. If you stick to those principles, you are taking extra effort and cost up front, and you're carrying more decision points when you're looking at technologies to be introduced into your business to ensure you maintain that flexibility. So those principles that we have in that first slide carry through and have done for many years as we've evolved networks and tools. Secondly, of course, standards are critical to minimize the scope of the things that you're going to be managing. So we have pretty strict standards for how we actually build out management systems. Thirdly, we have to build tools to enable us, custom tools sometimes, to enable us to affect those principles, because there may not be anything on the market to do that. And sometimes that gives us the ability to differentiate ourselves to some degree. So in a support sense, but that commitment means investing in those principles, standards, tools before you have a return, a bit like Edward was talking about with regard to the commitment to implement UFB. And finally, of course, you've got to have great documentation, because you're not sure when people are remote who's going to be executing functions. So your team may have to be more flexible, and so your documentation becomes very important. Finally, of course, we've all got the same issue that we need great people and we need to retain great people, because all the tools in the world won't keep companies running without good people. So a couple of things here. Day zero, which is what we've talked about, you need to be ready to move anytime. From our point of view, fortunately, we were in that position. So on day one, we could move. And on day two, we were there just carrying on business as usual, but not in the office. That gave us the capacity to ensure that our customers, our standards, our service levels were maintained. And they're maintained through any of those class of outage events that we've seen, earthquakes, pestilence, whatever it's going to be. It allows us to focus on what counts, our customer. And in fact, because we could move on one day and we had day two on, we had capacity to assist a couple of our customers in trying to get those remote services up faster to get their businesses working from home and remote. So, in summary, remote readiness. Your critical systems have to run where you want them. It's not always the cloud, but you do need to have that remote access, and you do need to have your business resilience in play. There are lots of reasons you may not run them in the cloud through high performance systems, jurisdiction, and sometimes it's just straight cheaper because you may have high load systems. You need to be able to remote your support, and I'll focus there on our tools, and also the fact that in our case, right from the very beginning, our support center, our 7x24 center, has always been able to be relocated very quickly. Today, it's in 1 day. Obviously, when we have remote staff, we're looking at making sure that we're maintaining secure, remote access, and we need to maintain really great continuity. So this change is upon us. We've got a great opportunity to improve our businesses with our digital readiness. We're going to hand back to Ed now. Thank you very much.
Man, that mute button, I don't know, it needs to be bigger. Thank you, Dave. Look, so far we've been talking about things that have happened and that maybe we should have done earlier, like investing in infrastructure, or that we did really well as a nation, for example. I thought it would be a little bit of a missed opportunity if we wouldn't also talk a little bit about the future. I mean, the pandemic has happened. It may happen again. We don't know. But at the moment, we are back into the office, or we're moving back into the office, or we could move back into the office. So what's next? And how can we learn from these lessons of what they've just mentioned, you know, invest before you need it? And I was part of a group last night that talked about data governance. You had the people from several government agencies and the likes of the Reserve Bank and so forth. And it was the message was loud and clear. We know what we need to do. We need to unlock data. There's so many initiatives, and around the table, most of these CIOs or chief data officers almost unanimously said, yes, we now have more budget to do that, both for the security part of data, but also for actually making more out of data. And they shared the reason for that is really that UFB example that I mentioned earlier. We know that we need to do this, and we now have seen what happens if we don't invest at the right time, if we leave it for too late, whether it is losing out on competition or not being able to operate as a business at all. So I thought I'd spend the remaining time, the next give or take 10 minutes, to talk a little bit about data and what the opportunities are that we see for almost every business. And data is that beautiful thing, right? So most of you would have heard something along the lines of data is the new oil, in the sense of it has so much value. In opposition to oil, it also exists in abundance, and it just gets more and more. But the dirty little secret also is that data is pretty useless unless it is refined. So all these promises around data looked a little bit like this, right? That's what we thought we'd get. We get the treasure growth of gold, and we can just mine it, and there it is, and it looks all nice and shiny and neat. But reality is more that it looks like this. And that was also one of the clear messages that came from the DHBs, that really, they were under the pump. They had to deliver numbers every single day, and their numbers came from 80% paper. That probably looked not too dissimilar to this. So this is the promise. This is reality. How do we move? We know this. Intuitively, we know that we have data, but we also know that we're not doing the most with it. So what are the steps that you as an organization could look into to unlock that data, and where you don't need your 50 million digital transformation project to go along with it? if you look at data and data refinement, how do you actually get it? You really have 3 steps, give or take. You got phase 1, which is really where you get you source the data, you generate it, you collect it from your everything from paper forms to your digital portals, apps, internal business systems, and a lot of this data is generated by clicking a button or filling in a text field. Then you got at phase 2. Once you get this, you typically have to clean and refine it, especially legacy data, right? Data that's been in the organization for 5, 10, 15 years that may not be very consistent or might just be plain wrong. And then only in phase 3 is where you start unlocking these insights and turn that effort back into profit, revenue, insight, whatever it is that takes you a step forward. And I want to share one sort of possible quick win or thought to pursue for you in each of these phases, depending on where you are in your journey. So phase 1, generating data. Everybody's focusing on the digital transformation on their databases, in most cases relational databases. If you were really smart 20 years ago and invested in Jade, then you might have an object relational database, but by and large, you're looking at pretty much the same system over the last 10, 15 years. I encourage you to look into new sources of data. And there are 2 examples here on the screen. On the left-hand side, think of your paper and how quickly you could turn this into really actionable information with some very basic AI technologies, OCR, entity extraction, and so forth. This example is something that Jade has done a while ago for an insurance company that allowed them to do a one-click quote where you say, well, if you have already a policy, a relatively complex policy, even in this case, why don't you just upload your existing policy and we parse this automatically, turn it around and give you immediately a quote back because all the data that we need is already in there. It's an insurance example, but I see this across health. I see it across construction. I see it in almost every vertical that I've ever touched. There's a lot of paper, forms or contracts and the likes. You don't have to wait until you have a system that digitizes all of that and generates it in a digital format. You can actually take it as that, as such, and use some tools or small projects to really drive and get data out of it. The right-hand side is work that Jade's recently done here in Christchurch with the local council that is generating new data from video. So it's finding car parks, counting cars, measuring speed, measuring movement patterns. It is data that didn't exist. Well, it always existed, but we didn't know it existed. It's in a video format that can be passed in real time or in historic information, and very similar to the whole concept of IoT, where you get data from all sorts of sensors rather than just user input forms in your website or in your ERP system. So the tip here is really, it doesn't have to be either of those, but think about data in a broader way than your relational database or your ERP system or your SAP, whatever you have, whatever you ever used to have. Now stepping into step 2, which is about cleaning and refinement of data. I really like the concept. When you think about data, you tend to have either that monolithic big ERP systems, that go-to pattern that we did in the 80s and 90s, and some of them are still around, where everything is in a single system. It is the source of truth, and therefore it knows everything. And the problem, of course, with these systems, as we've learned over the years, is they're really, really difficult to change and adapt to market circumstances, to compliance, regulations, and, right? It's a huge effort to both change it and then test it and then make sure nothing has been broken, and. So over the last decade or so, we really started to break it out more. There are more off-the-shelf platforms that allow you to to have a best of breed approach across your tools and systems. And then the problem, of course, is this generates data islands. Right? So now you have your CRM system that knows everything about your customer, or it knows some parts of the customer, and then you have something like your inventory system or your policy system or your billing engine or whatever it is over there that has similar information. And the problems that companies often have is that they either get out of sync, or one of the systems doesn't actually have all the information that it needs, and you miss out on half of the functionality of that system. So the way to approach it, and the way that certainly we encourage organizations to go down, is a decentralized data approach. And that's a little bit like running sushi, where you sort of, everything, a system has a change, is the master of say, your customer contact information. It receives the change, it puts it on that little travelator belt, and any other system that likes the look of that data. So for example, your billing engine that says, oh, I want to generate an invoice and send it out, I should probably know the most accurate address or most up-to-date address of our customer. We'll just take it off and process it. The only difference to this running sushi is that there are endless copies on there, so 5 systems can take the same copy and process it. And what that creates is a best of breed world where each system is in sync all the time, but you only have one master. Now, I'm going to let this sit for about 5 seconds, because the concept is really, really powerful, although it sounds really simple. You've got multiple systems, best of breed, that have everything they need without the issue that they ever get out of sync. So that's our pro tip number 2, if you want, for the refinement pipeline. And then for the third one, unlocking insights. That obviously requires you already having that data processed in some form or another, and having a relatively consistent picture. And then, so most organizations either use the inbuilt functionality of their ERP system or best of breed system, and that's fine, and you don't need any tips around that. But what I want to open your eyes to is also think about it in a slightly different way. Those dashboards are really, really good, but there's more to it. You can now very quickly turn this into storytelling, into narration. Those insights aren't of any use if people can't make decisions based on it. And so to illustrate this, I brought you an example, again, from the insurance space. That's my life these days. Yes, it's exciting. Where you have, it's actually a life insurance comparison. And so what the system does is it gives you back this beautiful table, even nicely formatted, with all your products that you can have and the price attached to it, and then all the features of each of the products down there, right? Really nice, really comprehensive. What do I do with it? I actually have to understand this. I have to look through it properly, right? I'm still not really sure what you're trying to tell me here, other than, I see a lot of green ticks and that sort of stuff. Especially in financial reporting, in risk reporting and the likes, we really benefit from a storytelling around it, something that takes this complex table and turns it into essentially an executive summary. And that's exactly what we've done here. On the right-hand side, you see an email generated that pulls in these vast number of data points of this table and breaks it down into, this is your most affordable option, this is your most comprehensive option, this is your most flexible option, gives you those 3, attaches the whole table so you can still have the whole detail, but it dramatically accelerates the decision making, because you get more comfortable, you get a story to be told. You don't need highly paid analysts to do it. You use those analysts to create the rules of how you identify what's what, but then you use software, in this case again artificial intelligence, to narrate it. And now, instead of, or in addition to just that table, You also get your 3 paragraphs, make you feel a lot better about what you should focus your attention on, and you will get decisions made a lot faster. Right, so these are sort of the 3 tips that we thought we'd share. By no means are they all of what you should do or could do, but if you are thinking about your initiatives that you know you should be doing, that you no longer want to put off because there are very clear signs that you should invest, you should follow your conviction, not just when something has happened, but long before. Not just as an insurance premium, but to actually drive your business forward. Here are 3 things that you can look in if you want in the data space. And so really, the conversations that we have and keep having are, they're switching from, can you afford to innovate? Can we find that budget in our organizations? Where does it sit in all our other priorities? The question is really morphing to, what can we afford not to? Huh? Where does it leave us if we don't do it? And with that, I will hand over back to Craig.
Thanks very much, Edward. And thanks very much, gentlemen, for your presentations. There are a couple of questions in the question and answer section. I see, Edward, you answered one in the chat, but if anyone else has any questions, write them in there. I've got a couple, and we'll need everyone to unmute themselves in case they want to answer the question. But I think this came out of David's one. I'll start with this one. It's a bit straightforward. He talked about clever people and about having people. And then practically you talked about subsidised broadband. And I had a question for you. Did everybody in Jade get subsidised broadband, or did you pick and choose?
Everybody got it. We needed to have the whole business capable of being remote working. It's a principle. And yeah, the whole company gets subsidised broadband, so our whole workforce is available.
And before, I'm hogging the questions at the moment. So before this event, were you were comfortable that you were already ready to work, everyone was ready to work remotely?
We had the capability. Technically, it was a business decision, not a technical decision. Yeah, we were comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, and we did it in a day.
All right, now I'm going to leverage off all the intelligence in the room between you 3. Rohan McMahon has said, you know, there's quite a few people on the call will already be advocates of digital readiness. What, and this is a perennial question, have you got some ideas on how we might reach that great unwashed that perhaps aren't ready? Anyone want to start?
Well, I think one path is clearly that some of the cloud vendors are pushing down into the SME space, and I'm thinking particularly here of companies like Xero. So I'm sure that at the time of the Christchurch earthquakes, which is nearly 10 years ago, a large number of companies would have had all their financial records on premise, and that now a large number of companies, and I'm not sure what the proportion is, would actually have their financial records on Xero. And I know a number of the small traders that I deal with, for example, my hairdresser is on Xero. Both the builders I've used recently have been on Xero. And so for them, their offices now, anywhere they've got a browser. And I think it's not just Xero, I'm just using them as an example, but the vendors that are pushing that sort of service into the SMEs are starting to help to prepare that ground.
Mm. Others of you?
I would say education is a big part. You're absolutely right. I had very different experience. I had this experience similar to John, right, where there's a property development going on a couple houses down on my street, right, and they had an issue with water. I rock up there, and the guys are just on their smartphone with a few clicks reporting the problem, totally tech savvy. It's just part of what they do. Obviously, the physical part of the work in construction and property development and so forth you can't really digitize this, or it will take a long time till the robots come. And then you see the other side of the things, where I was at school the other day, and I got interviewed by students about a little bit of stuff that I did over the lockdown period. And so they were busy taking notes the whole time, couldn't really listen to what I said. And the teacher suggested that they will listen, and then, they're just going to record it. And I said, well, you can just record and they will transcribe it for you. Do you know that? And I'm like, no, I have no idea why, how, right? And so I said, well, you can either use, any number of apps, or you could just activate it in Google Notes or in, Google Sheets. And so a lot of it is just this education that there's so much already available at no cost or very little cost. And I think that's a mandate for all of us, really. Rowan, you mentioned we're all digitally savvy, and I absolutely agree. But really opening people's eyes at every opportunity to say, you don't have to do it this way anymore. There is something really cheap, really easy that will take that pain away. And so the first thing they ever have in their digital journey is this wow moment. Oh, wait, I don't have to type this all up afterwards. That's awesome, right? And so that creates that desire to want to do more.
Yeah, I'd like to extend that out a little bit. Again, it comes down to a question I wrote down while David was speaking. You must have said some good things, David. You talked about building out before it's needed, but I had the question, well, how do you know? How do you know it's going to be needed? And then if you could start with that.
Okay, so obviously we can't predict events as we've been going through. We couldn't have predicted the earthquake. We couldn't have predicted COVID at the time that it occurred anyway. But one of the things we can predict is that such events will occur, whatever their nature is. And so we do know that locality becomes a problem, which is something we identified early. So once you've adopted the principle of location independence, you now have to invest not to be location dependent. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, is if you've identified the principle, then fulfilling that, it requires commitment and effort. There's a degree of inevitability about this. We all plan for DR and business continuity, even though it doesn't occur very often. And it costs us to build it out, and it costs us to test it, but we still do it. This is really just an extension of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think, for that, I'm just going to comment that it's largely driven out of your risk management. So as a business, we should be going through our risk management process, and depending on the structure, that's a key part of governance to ensure that we have a risk management plan in place. Part of that is assessing, what risks we face and then putting mitigations in place. And so for Jade, as an example, and in particular, we have quite a comprehensive risk mitigation strategy related around business continuity. And in fact, we have had a pandemic plan in the wings since SARS of how we would manage a pandemic. We, to be honest, never quite expected one to be like a global one, because SARS was more localised. But the plan was there, and we had the process in place to put in place a lot of the things that we've actually ended up doing. And we dusted that plan off late last year when COVID first hit the news to bring it up to date. And there are other chapters in our business continuity playbook, but I think that overall perspective is that companies need to manage risk.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because it doesn't matter what size your business is or even who you are. If you look at your risk profile, and that could be as simple as looking at, if I can't take orders, I can't do something, or even doing the level 3, if I can't do contactless payment, I can't be paid, for example. So it's really could be as simple as that, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was one of the things that I heard yesterday that I really liked was that all these CIOs said we're essentially now suddenly insurance brokers, and suddenly we don't actually feel that bad about it. And I think that's also the challenge, right? We all intuitively know that insurance is a good thing. It is the risk mitigation, like John says. But if we often don't appreciate that we know that this risk can happen, but it's a little bit like driving, right? It's never going to happen to me, right? I'm a good driver. It's never going to happen to me, sort of thing. And that's the challenge to overcome. And that's not a technology challenge. That's not even a budget challenge. That is predominantly a psychological challenge, I think.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you a big, hairy, audacious question, and I'm going to go round so I'm going to go David, John, Edward, because that's how you appear on my screen. We've been through this period where digitalization has, the changes we've seen have just accelerated so many things, right? What do you think a vision or how do we make sure that acceleration continues on with yourselves, our clients, and us as a nation? So I'll start with David. Try and keep your answers short if you can, please.
I was going to say, this is a futuristic view, and we've all got long answers to this, I've got to say. I guess I should just pick a corner of it. Probably automation of a lot more of our civilization, of our urban communities particularly. We'll see more things in transport and automation in that areas, because it just makes sense from safety point of view, for efficiency, for green, for also parking. That will become, I think, in a generation mandatory, that you won't be able to drive your own car in a city.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the kind of thing I see happening to the good side as well.
Okay. John?
I love this subject. This is, I'll be as quick as I can. I think it's a well-known thing that we tend to overestimate how much things are going to change in the short term and underestimate how much they're going to change in the long term. And I just think it's such an exciting time. And if we look back how much things have changed in how short a time, and it's just ridiculous how short a time it is since the iPhone came out, and ridiculous how short a time it is since, say, Facebook started. And we imagine that the pace is only going to accelerate. So for me, I think it's just about keeping an open mind and being prepared to keep up and being prepared to reinvent ourselves and to compete with ourselves before somebody else does, because it will happen.
We might need to get you on again to talk about your long answer. Edward, you got anything?
I want to pick up on the reinvent that John said. I think I've heard a lot of talk publicly and behind closed doors about reimagining New Zealand as a country, as a society. A lot of questions around what is really important to us. I think it is completely inevitable that technology will accelerate and keep accelerating. I don't think we have to do anything for that. It's just happening. The key thing is really for us to understand what that means for us as humans and our role that we play. And that just because we automate certain things that feels like a threat right now, but actually if as a society we figure this out and we figure out what we actually really care about, and that was the positive aspect of this lockdown, then it becomes less threatening, and we're quite willing to automate things that we don't really actually want to do anyway, and we get more time to do the things that we do care about. And that's circling back all the way to the beginning where John said, look, it is our people. This is where IP or the value in a company still sits. Everything else is commodity, and yes, we want to be more efficient, but it is people serving people and people knowing stuff that you won't automate anytime soon.
Yeah. Look, thanks so much. This is normally the point at a Two Hands event where we go off and have a few drinks together, but unfortunately we're still not in that position. So look, I want to thank Edward, David and John. Great presentation this afternoon. Thank you very much. Also want to thank the team at Jade, Eva and Teresa for helping us pull it together. This, like all of our webinars, will be up on our YouTube channel probably by the end of the evening. And we'll make, if you want to watch it again or make it available, share it with other people. Look, we wanted to set the scene with this one, and I think we have. We've talked about why and what you need to think about, and we've set some almost aspirations there as well. And we're going to head into these webinars. We're going to head into various topics on, you know, what's coming down the track. Not sure we're going to go into the driverless cars one, but we might. But certainly the next one's going to be about the future of payment and how we're going to pay for things going forward. And this is just not talking about contactless. This is a whole range of things. And we're also going to be talking about 5G, because if you can't connect, you can't do half of this stuff anyway. So, yeah. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, team. And we will be around and talk again. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much for having us. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.